since we're moving some of the on-prem stuff to the cloud, we're migrating servers from on-prem to cloud, Azure environment, came across this thing. We need to create like a test environment. On-prem, you normally have to just spin up the VM, put your stuff in, and it's there for you. But now we move to most of our stuff, production stuff, move on to Azure IaaS environment, infrastructure environment, and we love to create like a test environment for like some machines, and we don't want to use that for like, let's say, more than 1 month or something like that. Then we love to create some sort of test environment, and this is where I think of using PowerShell and then just spin up the test environment in the Azure environment and then kill it off when you don't need it anymore. So let's go through to the journey. So my name, my position, my Twitter feed, where I work. Right, so what do we want to do today? So we want to build test environment on Azure environment. The PowerShell script that I've written so far is basically built all of that. Your virtual network, it then creates your site-to-site VPN. It then creates some storage account where you want to put your stuff in and virtual machines. It could be more than one, and then use your DSC script to deploy onto your machine. But I'm not using runbook. I'm just using blob storage and then just publish the DSC onto this machine. So this is for today's demo. So after the demo, once we run it, we'll end up with this environment, and the real life test environment will be definitely different to this, and you probably have to put like loads of thought into it. So the way I do it is I've written all the PowerShell script, but every time you want to do this little thing, that little thing, you run that PowerShell script and you get that thing on your environment. You run that script, you get that in the environment. But later on, I'm just going down to the route where I just want to do the whole shebang and then have it there, spin it out the whole environment with servers and everything that you need. And if you don't want it, you'll just kill it. What I found is Azure DevOps is quite easy to use, and then just create the pipeline on it, and then just line up all your code like the way you want to run, and then once you click run, and it will just fire up all your PowerShell script on the Azure environment, and it will just spin up the whole environment for you. So the first thing, so when you start writing your PowerShell script and you want to make your script as your infrastructure as code, you need some sort of version control. So in my case, it's quite easy. Just use GitHub. I think everyone is okay with that one. And on your pipeline, when you run your pipeline, it will check out your code for you. Because I'm running it not manually, so I need to make sure my scripts are right. I've got the right folder, I've got the right file, so I'm doing some validation tests. And once I've done it, I'll then do my unit test for all the functions that I've written, which is going to be used by the main script. So I then do deploy my PowerShell script to Azure, and then run infrastructure test script. I don't know why it gets stuck. Coming soon. Oh, it's there now. Okay, cool. Duplicates. Right, so once you don't want your environment anymore, why is it? back up. Okay, cool. Teardown script. So I've got my Teardown script, but that Teardown script basically pick up all your resource group that you created as part of your deployment script, and then just trash them all. And that whole thing is, except the Teardown script, it put into the Azure pipeline YAML file. So the next bit, so I'm thinking, just instead of showing what I've done, I'm just thinking like maybe we'll go through this journey together. So I'm just gonna go down to the actual DevOps, Azure DevOps, and then we'll then build the pipeline, and then we'll then deploy it. We'll then run a script, and we'll then go through my PowerShell script. That's my plan today. Cool. So so far on my own personal Azure subscription, it's got nothing in it. No resource group, no virtual machine, no virtual network, just to prove. So Azure DevOps is free to use. So all I need to do is just create account, log into it, and then create your project. In my case, I'll just use the existing one. Once I've got that project, I'll then have to just build the pipeline there. So I'm just gonna build it. Pipeline, new pipeline. So where is your code? My code is in GitHub. So I'm just gonna use GitHub. Wanted to try the second one. So it picks up the YAML file. Before I've gone through this whole stage, I actually come into Azure DevOps, and then I basically pick up the component that I want to use, and then just put them in, and then create a build at these whole steps. So once I've done it, all I need to do, just gonna run it. That takes a while. Okay, cool. So now, sure.
Is it your like production environment or just like a test environment you're showing to us right now?
This is the test one. It's my personal one.
Okay, because I was impressed with 100% of successful execution.
Tell me your secrets.
So, well, definitely, I failed a lot before I did it. So what I just described on my slides, initially it just pick up my code from GitHub and then check out my code. And then I run my validation test there. This validation test is basically just to make sure you have all your script in place. I'm using Microsoft hosted VM, so it's not on-prem, the one that I built myself. So this is just random. Microsoft just spin that up for you when you run your pipeline. And once I've done it, and then I run my unit test, which basically tests all the functions on all the PowerShell modules that I've written. So I've got quite a few there. And it will then build the virtual network. So for me to run this, the whole thing, I think it takes about 10 minutes. I leave out the site-to-site VPN one because it does take like an hour or so. So So while it's running, we can go back and I can share my PowerShell script. So this is how I put my folder structure. So I've got my PS code, the main one, and I've basically, the first thing that I did was, it's inside the module, on the test, so file validation test. So all I did was just, this is a Pester. So I've got a list of all the files that I should have when my code gets checked out, and then I just run it against the actual temporary location on the hosted VM, and just use this to its statement. And then I did, so these are my functions that I split them into. So, can you guys see it? Yeah. So I wrote my functions, but I split them into like, depending on what I want to do. So the first one, for example, like RG, just mainly to deal with the resource group, and then store to deal with the storage account, and then VM to create the VM, all the functions to create the VM. VNet is for the VNet, and VPN is for the VPN. It's quite simple. So what I want to share here is the way I built my VM, for example, is I've got all my VM script, all the functions in here. Let me just minimize them. Yeah. So I've got all my script there, all my functions. All I'm doing is test, is it there? And then if it's not there, build it using new. And like a public IP address assignment and all that sort of stuff, I built the component first, and then I try to assign it into the right resource. If it's the machine, or if it's the machine, or if it's for the gateway and all that sort of stuff. So these are all my functions. I use those functions and then say I built the VM. So now, so this script will just basically build the VM for me. So all I have to do is I basically imported all those scripts with the try catch at the top, and then this deploy VM will just basically grab all the information that I need from my config file. So I use PSD file for my VM information. So if I just want to create another VM, all I need to do is just change the value in here and just point that PSD file to my VM, right, that config file there, and it will just build everything for me. So this is the part where it's actually create the VM. So this bit, so that creates the VM. Sure.
Just for a quick one, any particular reason why you didn't put your like deployment scripts into separate PowerShell model, like properly wrap it up into models so you can separate your pipeline for actual deployments and pipeline to change and update and release your model?
I thought of that, but I'm just thinking like, because I'm just using it with the Microsoft hosted VM, so I'm just thinking that this is easier way to do it.
I wouldn't agree that it's easier, but yeah, it's up to you. But just thought maybe there are some reasons for it that you might take into account.
No, I do agree with what you're saying. If I have like a VM machine and I say I used on-prem hosted machine, all I need to do is just dump all my module in that location, and update it. And I don't even need to put these, I don't even need to check out these code. All I need to do is just run these script.
Yeah, but even if you're running it on a hosted VM, you can put your models as part of the like prerequisites, so they will get deployed onto a hosted agent if you need them. So like, just I find it quite useful to separate it, just to segregate your changes into models and changes into your like actual pipeline to deploy it.
Yeah, I agree. But well, what I'm thinking is, because I'm using like GitHub, so it's on a repo as well. So do you want to have it on have it somewhere else, or do you want to put it?
Separate repo.
Yeah.
Just for consistency.
Yeah. True. Okay. Right. So if we go back to VM, yeah. So it's deploy virtual network. Yep. So if I want to, I could show you my VM. So this is the PSD file for the VNet that I used to create. So I've got all my NSG root, I just stick it in there like that. And if I want to add one more root, I can just copy and paste one of those and then change the value and run my script again, and it will create it on the second time when you run it. It's not 100% idempotent, but it will just basically do a basic test. Is it there? If it's not there, create it, and it will create it.
Did you consider creating pre and post conditions tests for each of your steps, so that when a build fails, you get some more useful information as to what the error is?
Pre and post condition.
Specifically the network interfaces. So after creating the network interface, like a post verification step, verifying that the command you've just executed gives you some visible behavior that you can then test. So if it has a nick immediately afterwards, that I can talk to it, for example, or that it responds. I can ping the nick. Maybe I don't know what your test would be specifically.
Yeah, I do have the infrastructure test script at the end of the whole lot, so it will then tell me if it's fail, it is fail. If I just show you that bit here. So basically this is the infrastructure test. So after I built it, I then go through each and every component which I built, and then on there it basically check, are you there? Have you got this value? Have you got that value against the config file that I use? So yeah.
So the last big contract that I was on, I noticed the team we had quite a significant environment setup that would run for a couple of hours with many different steps. And we would find that the teams would spend a huge amount of time diagnosing the errors at the end, because you would have a build that would run and one team that would pass, another team that would fail. And they would spend maybe a day or 2 days diagnosing just what the error is. And if we had had preconditions and a pre-test or validation test after each step, it would have saved us a huge amount of time. So it's just a lesson learned from working on that project.
Thank you for that. So if I get to show you this, for example, so like what you just said. So before I actually create the virtual network, for example, I just basically try to grab that information, grab if that virtual network is already there or is it created already. So I put that condition in there. So that's a test virtual NIC, and then if you look at it there, so this is the actual new virtual NIC, and on my actual script that I create the VM. So initially, just going through some basic check, and then, yep. So here it is. So it's basically check whether is it already there. If it's not there, then it will then create it. Yeah, basically that's how I approach it.
How do these scripts differ from the wizard-generated PowerShell scripts that you get if you edit your pipeline in Azure using the GUI? I mean, I like editing my YAML manually, but the scripts, most of the scripts that you would use in the wizard, I want to create I want a AZ copy, for example. AZ copy really just passes it on to a PowerShell script behind the scene. But these are PowerShell scripts that Microsoft has written. Have you found that, do you call to the same one that Microsoft uses, or do you have extra functionality here that's not in the open source PowerShell scripts for Azure?
So these are just the one from Microsoft. I just basically use whatever the latest version. And one thing that I come across is when you create this storage account, if your name, because that storage account, when you create the storage account name, it has to be unique across the whole Microsoft environment, right? In that case, I was looking for that, what is it, the command. They used to have one command, PowerShell command, but it's not available for the AZ PowerShell module. So I end up writing that API call myself. Let me just show you something like that. So just say, where is it store? Yep. So for example, for you to run that name availability check, you need to get the access token. And then once you get your access token, basically just use that API query, and the API version is whatever I can see the latest there. I just use that query and then just invoke it, and then it will tell me that name is available or not. Of course, yeah. Is available. at the moment is at the moment it's at the moment it's private, but I'll make it public once I've done. Sure.
So a couple of summers ago, I went and spent a couple of days at Microsoft, and I had a Microsoft senior scripter walk me through ARM templates.
Yeah.
And this is looking very similar to an ARM template.
Yeah.
I'm wondering what's the differences between using an ARM template and using this, or if there is any.
If I'm doing this presentation in UK infrastructure team, I'll be using ARM template that way. This is PowerShell community, so yeah. So I did PowerShell script.
You can compile an ARM template with PowerShell, so your
presentation
could be applicable to both user groups.
Yeah. So it's just for that, I did prepare something. If I show you one of my PSD file, which I used to create storage account. So I can make my config file to have that sort of variable. You see that parameter and variable. If you have your JSON ARM template, you get your parameter JSON file and then your variable. So if I just follow that pattern, and I can actually get the ARM template and then feed it into my PowerShell script and then run it and get the result. I can go down that route, but I think that in that case, at that point, it's no point to do it, because you can just use the new -ARM template as a resource script deployment, and then just use that. It saves a lot of time. But ARM template, the way I see it, it's not the actual code. It's more like a data file, a JSON file. And if you want to comment something, you have to write a metadata and then put your thing. It's a lot more. But if it's on a PowerShell script, just hash it and then put your comment on it.
Should we, as a community, instead of developing these things, should we be contributing this to the Is there a reason you wrote this yourself and didn't contribute it or as a pull request to the actual open source?
I wrote it myself, yeah. I wrote it myself. 2 weeks, 2 weeks of evening. But the real life scenario will definitely be different, because if I'm building the actual real life test environment, then what I want to do would be create a RODC. You have your VNet, you have your site-to-site VPN setup. You then build a RODC, read-only domain controller, which will then talk to your actual domain controller on-prem. Then you build all the other VM that you want in that environment. So for that scenario, I think you do get, well, it's involved quite a lot of stuff. So in that case, because I want to like, how do I put it? You can't just simply get a template for building those machines. So in those cases, you actually have to write the code yourselves. So
I was just talking about the name.
Oh. Sorry. Right, so have we done building our environment? So yeah, so that's done. The unit test is now done. Once I've done a unit test, I built my VM. Yep. Built my VNet, built my VM. Yep. And then I made my VM IIS server with some page in it. So that, and then I run my infrastructure tests. So that will basically check to make sure everything what I wanted is already there. And this is just the final bit that I was just using it to test it. So if I go down to, let me just copy this one. So that's the VM which is being built just now. So I put a static HTML. But actually what I find out is, even though I say it's a journey to one click, actually once you've got your pipeline, it's 2 buttons, queue and run. Or if you
You can create a small script that will basically make an API call to queue it and release it, so it will be real one click.
Okay. What I'm trying to say here is, if you trigger that to master, or if you do a pull request, you can then trigger your code and you don't have to click anything. Yeah, so that's it. So that VM. So what I did when I write my script, I don't want to put plain text. So even though you can see what you think my password is there, but I'm just gonna paste it there. If you actually want to see my password, it's like that. But you can't, by looking at my code, for example, config file, VM, all you're seeing is this. So even
What is this?
base 64.
Yeah, but it's reversible. So since this, we can decode your password.
Yeah, you can, but it's, all I'm trying to say is not plain text.
Why not?
Yeah, it is, but
Why not generate the password on the fly and store it in a key vault, for example?
yeah, if you can go down to that route, then that's a good one, but it's a lot more involved. Username wrong. Is it still there? It's no longer there. Because I said 10 minutes. Basically, I'm just trying to replicate the behavior from KeyPass. Right. So that's the core VM, which is built by the pipeline. If I just
I'll get you first.
just do this. So as part of that deployment script, what I did was I actually created where is it? Actually created the storage account. So I've got storage account in there. I created blob storage, share, and a table name. So if I just come down here, where's storage account? So file, and I just wanted to connect to this one. So PowerShell. So just trying to create, just trying to connect to a network share, and I have to press enter on that one. Yeah. So new item, name, test.txt, value is this is a test, then create it. So that got created now. If you look at it now, it's there. I find it really scary. But do you know what I mean? Once you deploy that, what is it? Network share, 5 terabyte default.
That's 5 gig.
No, 5 terabyte.
Why it's scary?
Huh?
Terabytes, yeah.
Why is it scary?
Yeah.
It's scary. Data control.
Run your own script. Just wipe everything.
Oh yeah. Okay, so shall I go through? Yeah. So what should I show you guys next? Yeah, big64 API query infrastructure teardown script. So let's say I don't want it anymore. So this is my teardown script. So all I'm doing here is just looping through all my configuration file and then see if the resource group is already there. If it's there, then zap it. If it's not there, then skip it.
What if you have deployed a new VM into your resource group with the same name? I mean, like you deploy in your test environments.
Yeah.
And let's say you deployed one test environment and then the other one and use the same resource group. So your teardown script will delete 2 environments instead of 1.
It will delete everything, yeah.
Okay.
So in that case,
Used to resource groups.
Yeah. Oops, yeah. One way to split it would be like split it in your subscription.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
I think the next presentation will be on
information.
Oh. Yeah. Okay, so when I first run my Teardown script, what I end up happening was trying to remove the virtual network, but you can't delete it because you have your VM running. It's dependent on VNet. So what I actually have to do, basically I just get the whole list and then I have to reverse it and then try to run it that way. And I also put try a parameter there so that I can, if that didn't get deleted on the first attempt, then try second time.
Does that always work? Because a couple of months ago, we had problems where if you get your VNet and you delete, it used to be that Microsoft allowed you to delete things that would orphan other things, and then you'd have to call tech support to actually tear down your environment. You'd have to create a ticket.
Oh, well, when I run with my PowerShell script, it just say fail, and it has got some dependency. I've got the error message, and it won't continue. It stopped there. Once it stopped there, well, that would be another exercise for you to go through your teardown script and then try to do it gracefully. So if it's the real life test environment, then if I have read-only domain controller in my test environment, then I actually have to demote my domain controller properly. If not, you end up with often attribute on your AD. So in that case, you do have to do it nicely, and then that will probably become another. You build this and then you don't want it, then let's try it.
So in that situation, you couldn't just delete the resource group.
No.
You have to first tear down certain things in certain sequences.
Yeah.
That kind of defeats the whole point of that resource group. I'm not saying it's your fault. I'm just.
Well, yeah. So the resource group, because your virtual machine resource group is actually running on top of your VNet. Then in that case, then it also makes sense to delete the virtual machine first and then delete the VNet later on. It's just a sequence, I would say. And one thing that I found out was after you deploy that for like 800 times, you can't deploy it anymore. You basically have to go through your go back to your the deployment and then delete the deployment history. And let's say you deploy 800 times, you can delete you can basically delete every single history, or just say you want to keep for your last 100 deployment, and then you keep there and then delete 700.
It's obviously they were not expecting you to do this 100 times.
Well, I found out the hard way, right? Okay, so that was it. I think I cover quite a lot of stuff there, and yeah, so these are the references that I just want to share with you guys. The last one is the one that I just talked about. After 800 deployment, you can't. Okay, so that's it from me. I hope there is something for everyone.
Any more questions?
Can it scale out to create multiple VMs?
You have to write your script to do that then, because in here, just for the demonstration purpose, it's just a simple VM. You can, of course, yeah.
Thank you.
Anyone? No?
In the beginning, you said that you killed the test environment. Is that just a cost consideration, or are there technical reasons as to why you would do that? So you said you built the test environment, and then
if you're on pay-as-you-go, then definitely cost. If you're on reserve VM environment, then it's not cost, but how do I put it? You can use it for a different purpose for the same amount of virtual machine that you can build. For example, if let's say I've got the reserve VM for SD2 or something like that, then I can just use the same VM to build SQL Server on it and then do your test. Later on, oh, I need to run this test for the IIS. You then kill that SQL Server and then put IIS on top of it, and then you test it. It's a cost, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone?
Any other questions?
Oh.
Right, so it's time to kill my environment then.
I'm just thinking, as a time-saving exercise, could you not just wipe the VM and keep everything else, and then create another VM?
Definitely, yes.
Yeah.
But if, yeah.
You've already got your resource
Like-
group
like-
there.
like
You've
I
already
said,
got your NIC and your networks and everything else.
Well, even if you kill everything, you spin it up. It doesn't take very long, does it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just in terms of it, if you're going to deploy it hundreds of times,
Yeah.
you don't need to deploy everything. Just a VM.
If you're starting increasing the complexity of the script to do that kind of validation, then aren't you just reinventing Terraform?
Definitely, definitely. Terraform and templates are out of question because this is for PowerShell. Right?
PowerShell is right now on version 7.
7.
And Terraform is still 0.1 something.
Terraform and complex environments don't match up. Any more questions? Well, thank you.
I'm just gonna kill my Teardown. Yeah, that will take some time. So,
Yeah.
thank you very much.
Thank you.